power and to curtail civil liberties. So this is, and yet another one. Here is from the Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance, the Global State of Democracy. It says democracy at risk. And then I highlighted down below, the United States has experienced gradual but significant weakening of checks on government and civil liberties. So it's not just outside our borders, but as we're going to discuss today, it's happening within our borders today. Now, this is once again from Didi, who insisted that I read a book called On Tyranny, and it has 20 lessons, 20 suggestions as to what we can do in the face of tyranny. And one of the things that he focuses on is the importance of history. Now, of course, to a history teacher like me, you're singing my song. And so this will appear later in the slide. I'm not going to read every slide to you, for God's sakes, but I want to go back and look at history and what we can use today as sort of a case study. And that was the Weimar Republic. This is the republic that existed in Germany after World War I. And of course, our narrative is that once you have democracy, you would never willingly let it go. Similar to there's no country on earth. Once they have healthcare for all, they never change their minds on that. And so we assume the same must be true for democracy. Well, not so much. And democracies, as it turns out, are quite fragile things. And the Germans were among the most highly educated on the planet at the time, certainly more highly educated than most Americans are today. And it was complicated indeed, but they did vote for Hitler. And so how could this have happened? And I used to teach my students, it wasn't just in Germany that fascism rose. It rose in Italy and in Japan, as we know, and then in the Soviet Union, in Russia, that became the Soviet Union. And there seemed to be two ingredients that would cause people to willingly let go of democracy. And one is desperation. And the Great Depression provided that for everyone. And the other essential ingredient is fear. And fear is, we know this just from our brain stems and our salamander brains, fear is the prime motivator for human behavior. And politicians know this, advertisers know this. Fear will get people to do things. And it inspired, would-be dictators, to inspire fear against the Jews or against immigrants or against communists, or more recently, you've got the militias against the government itself. And we should always beware of false flag events. Now, the most historians today, when the Reichstag, their parliament burned down. At the time, Hitler and the Nazis blamed it on the communists, and then they used that as their pretext to curtail civil liberties, round everyone up, and begin the march off to concentration camps. Most historians today believe it was the Nazis themselves that burned down the Reichstag. So bear that in mind. That is a tried and true strategy of any would-be dictator. And just remember, they want to curtail civil liberties. And so one is from On Tyranny, this quote: "People who assure you that you can only gain security at the price of liberty usually want to deny you both." And the other one of my favorite quotes, it's the same thing, but this one from Benjamin Franklin: "Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety." But they did in Germany. Now, of course, we believe we're special, American exceptionalism. And I think to some extent we were. And I love this by FDR, that at a time when most of the world was consumed and manipulated by fear, he was very clear. It's fear itself. We will not be motivated by fear. We will be different from the others. And unfortunately, later, we decided that our fear of domestic sabotage led to Japanese internment. And of course, you have to mix in a little bit of racism there, because there were plenty of Italians and Germans on our soil, but we didn't intern them, just saying. So anyways, at the time we were somewhat exceptional, The question is, are we still exceptional? Is there, since we were the first modern republic and our constitution is the longest standing constitution on the planet, uh, are we exceptional and therefore exempt from the darkening tides outside our borders? And, this is the belief that it can't happen here, not in the United States. And from On Tyranny, Snyder was very clear. A nationalist would say it can't happen here, which is, read it, the first step toward disaster. If we believe we are exempt, then we are on the slippery slope indeed. A patriot says that it could happen here, but that we will stop it. And that is why we are here today. They asked me to speak, refer back somewhat to what I spoke about last time. And last time I looked at these are pretty much the prerequisites that most lists include for what is necessary to establish democracy. And at the time, my talk dealt with the fact, and it came as a surprise to me, because I've never really looked at it from this perspective. At the time of our founding, we truly were exceptional. We checked all the boxes, every single one. And then when I looked at Mexican history, oh boy, they missed them all, and with dire implications for Mexico. However, I believe that these are not just necessary for the establishment of democracy. And by the way, we have a long sordid history of trying, we say, at least that's our pretext, we're going to establish democracy throughout the world, and we invade, and then we say, be free, when they don't have any of these prerequisites. And the results have been uniformly disastrous. There's a lot more to democracy than just a vote. But anyways, that's for the establishment of democracy. I am now convinced it's also for the maintenance and the endurance of democracy. And if these things start to slip, then democracy itself may slip. Now, I'm not going to go into all of these and give you a review. We're going to very quickly look at just a few. And the first one, of course, I'm a teacher. I'll be very upfront. I was a teacher because I was worried for my country. And everywhere I looked, I felt education was sort of the panacea that, if I think it was Jefferson who said, an educated populace is essential to a democracy. And the trouble is, we are in trouble. Now, a caveat, I wrote a book on education reform, and comparing test scores internationally is always a dangerous thing to engage in. And the scientists of Sandia came out with the Sandia report, and they said, you can't really do that because so many of the variables are just not, kept constant. But having said that, most of the other industrialized nations now outperform us. And if it says here, we are tied for last on tests of mathematics and so on. But look at this line. We now have the worst educated workforce in the industrialized world. I mean, my God, if we hope to sustain a democracy with a populated that is becoming increasingly ignorant, think again. And so I've been screaming for years, we are in trouble. Now, the answer, I can't resist, is not standardized testing or high stakes standardized testing, or even, the core curriculum. It's following Finland, that reformed its teacher educational program and reformed its economic system and so on. But I'll stay off that soapbox. If we do not have a strongly educated citizenry, then our democracy is in trouble, and it is. Secondly, we need a strong middle class. And at the time of our founding, we did. And as I believe most everyone knows, our middle class is shrinking every year worse. And at the bottom, our income inequality is now highest among industrialized nations. It's now comparable to Africa and many other third world nations. That is a sure sign that democracy, we're slipping into a feudal system in which, as you know, very few people at the top control all the wealth and all the power. And here's the trouble. When they do, a small minority at the top control the wealth and power, you really can't have a democracy, which is what we pretty much have today, is an oligarchy. In a Princeton study in 2014, it just studied what was the will of the people over the last few decades, and then what was the legislation that was actually enacted. And they said more often than not, our government is serving corporations, not the people. And so this is before the current problem facing us. It just means that over the last few decades, we have let democracy slip so that it's a small minority. We have the semblance of democracy, but it's actually a small minority, an oligarchy of corporations and military industrialists that are really calling the tune. And that's of concern. But there's more. It gets far worse. Now, I've just said that once we lose the things that keep us special, then we're in trouble. And this is from, actually, I'm quoting myself here from the afterword of my book. And yeah, we still are exceptional, but most of the ways in which the United States now leads the world are shameful, including military spending, arms exports, cost of healthcare, and the millions of children without it, drug use and abuse, incarceration, divorce, obesity, crime, including murders, mass murders, and rapes, income inequality among industrialized nations, depression, especially childhood depression. I mean, we're number one, but not in the ways we need to be. And so clearly, yes, our democracy and our very culture is in crisis. But as I said, wait, there's more. And this comes from, thanks again to Dee for turning me on tyranny. And this one I will read. He says, we believe that we have checks and balances. We believe we're clinging to this myth, but have rarely faced a situation like the present, when the less popular of the two parties suppresses voting, claims fraud when it loses elections, and controls the majority of state houses. The party that exercises such control proposes few policies that are popular with the society at large, and several that are unpopular, and thus must either fear democracy or weaken it. So now we come back to that list that I said about what's necessary for democracy. Two of them were commitment to democracy and respect for the rule of law. And when you have an entire political party that quite brazenly says they have not respect for either, we are in dire trouble indeed. And I will say this, oligarchy is one thing, and we're there already. Fascism and autocracy is quite another, and that's where we're slipping and sliding into it. Another thing that Dee turned me on to is a blogger, and I'll return to this, and that is Heather Cox Richardson. And she says Republicans have apparently given up convincing voters that their way is better through voter suppression, gerrymandering, the filibuster, and the Electoral College. And now with new election laws in 18 states, they have guaranteed that they will retain control no matter what voters actually want. Their determination to keep Democrats from power has made them abandon democracy. And an Ohio group, We the People Convention, was pleading with President Trump to become a dictator. I mean, it's frightening stuff. And then you've got a Republican cabal. We don't know how close we came to losing it in the last election, but there were people, including Vice President Mike Pence, who were, they had a command center about how to take the election. And they are currently planning on stealing the next election. And most damning of all, toward the bottom here, you see our efforts to take over how votes are themselves are counted. These are indeed frightening times. But multiple sources, David Atkins in the Washington Monthly, he said, we're in real trouble because they have to win only once, and we have to keep defeating them again and again. And he's calling for coordinated, this is for our discussion afterwards, coordinated, overlapping solidarity among both regular people and the elites, and I'll talk about that, across various institutions to stop it. And then most frightening is that most people, not only don't they believe in democracy, but they've already decided that the next elections will be fraudulent. These are scary times indeed. So what can we do? I've come up, and these are my humble suggestions, and I claim no expertise, merely throwing them out there for discussion. First of all, we need to stay informed, more so than ever before. Dee Dee told me about Heather Cox Richardson and then Robert Hubble. I would urge everyone to sign up for them. I have learned a ton. And then we have to start watching the news more closely, but please, we need, as I told my students, multiple sources of information, and above all, alternative sources of information, not just CNN and the mainstream media, as I'll talk about in just a minute. And we have to make a point to find people both outside mainstream media, those who criticize both Democrats and Republicans, such as Glenn Greenwald, and also those who disagree with us. I've signed up for the American Conservative. I just want to see what they're thinking. Because boy, my Facebook page is entirely an echo chamber. And I just keep, hearing people who agree with me. Well, that's what the people who disagree with, we aren't listening to those who disagree with us. It's a very dangerous place for all of us to be, even the liberals. And the other thing I just want to talk about, not trusting the American mainstream media. This is just one example. You'll all remember a while ago that the US government claimed that Assad in Syria had poisoned his own people, and we refused to wait around for an international or UN investigation. We declared ourselves yet again the cop of the world, and we launched our cruise missiles. Well, so sorry, there was a subsequent investigation, and it came out that doesn't look like Assad did it. Now look at the stuff in the bottom where they suppressed the findings and they conspired with the U.S. government to manufacture another report. Anyways, Tarek at the top, Tarek Haddad, he's a reporter with with Newsweek. He said, "Oh my God, we've got to report this because we reported it wrong. We reported what the government told us, and it turned out to be a lie. So we have a responsibility to fix our error." And Newsweek refused, and so he resigned. And why did that not make headlines? Because, well, mainstream media is controlled by 6 corporations. So I found this to be very frightening indeed. Anyways, what to do? Number 2. Because of that, think critically. Just because it comes from CNN doesn't mean it's true. And be aware that, the government has used fear to manipulate us for a long time. Terrorism led to the Patriot Act, which we've essentially given up our Fourth Amendment rights. And anyone who steps up and tries to blow a whistle, they end up in jail. I remember when the Republicans were in power, we were in threat level orange. And then the minute the election was over, all those threat levels disappeared. It was clear manipulation through fear. And as they said before, COVID is being used worldwide to inspire fear and to curtail liberties. We need to watch that very carefully here, because I've noticed that if anyone challenges the government narrative, they are completely ostracized. And these are dangerous times. And remember, at the bottom, our government has a long-standing tradition of lying to the American people. And as Jefferson said, democracy demands eternal vigilance. What to do? Number 3, we need to return to talking to each other, and even to those who don't agree with us. I've got some Republican cousins. We've just agreed to never talk about politics. I think that's the wrong way to go. I think even amongst ourselves, I just noted even in Zoom talks with friends, we talk about COVID, we talk about the playoffs. We rarely talk about the demise of our democracy. This comes from my kayaking buddy, Eric. Thank you, Eric. He read this piece that said, it's just acknowledging, listen, we're an oligarchy, they have the power. So let's get those people in power to step forward and start, stepping to the plate to defend democracy, because, civil war and fascism is not good for business. And as he said, the people who run these corporations need to, instead of just keeping to donate to the Republicans at the bottom, it's these people with the power currently in the United States. They need to defend democracy. I think we all need to read more. And this is from On Tyranny, where he says, read books. And this is what makes you a critical thinker, and the importance of history. It helps us understand today. So these are my 5 humble things as to what we can do to save our democracy. And at the bottom is my email. So if you'd like me to share those slides with you afterwards, just shoot me an email. So it's hello D Ellison, as in hello David Ellison at gmail.com. And thank you all for listening.
Wow. David, thank you for that. I'm going to call it a recap of sorts, but there was a lot of new information there as well. And I have to say, part of my brain wants to just say, well, it's over, but I'm not ready to do that. So let me get back here. Before we get into the, the quote unquote workshop, I'd like to see if anybody has any questions for David. And we just have like maybe 5 minutes for questions today, so we can talk a bit more about how we do our very best, our level best, to make the 2022 elections as good an outcome as we possibly can.
Question. Your workshop, however, will include opportunities to make comments, right?
Of course, of course.
Yeah, okay, so go right ahead.
Yeah, but if you have comments on David's presentation just now, let's do it right now while it's fresh.
Oh, in that case, my only one was it was rather hard to hear everything. So I'm going to look forward to the recording. I hope other people will have the same need to revisit this. And of course, the other sources are what's so critical. I was over in Europe for 30 years and constantly would hear from my American friends that I'm not hearing the truth. And I said, what do you mean? I'm hearing what others see of the US. And they would say, well, yeah, but you're getting a propaganda view of what we're doing over here. I said, no. I'm getting clarity. And I still highly recommend the sources that I'm using, which are inclusive of Euronews, obviously the BBC, the Guardian, France 24. There's a number of resources by which you can read and you can listen that will give you a different perspective, because the US news and the attitude in the US about the media is totally domestic issues. It's total isolation. Just to support you there very much, David, on what you were trying to say.
Thanks, Alona. Didi, you have a comment, question?
David, I just want to get an update on your book and what the name of it is and when it's coming out.
The book is called Niños Héroes, which is, very famous street name here in Mexico. Niños Héroes, the fascinating story behind Mexican street names. And I'm done writing it, but now I got to find a publisher. So I'm just as curious as you are, and I may end up self-publishing. So all will be revealed.
Let us know. We'll try to help sell it.
Cool. All right. Any other questions before we move on to the next portion? Okay. So I have the maybe unfortunate task of following David's presentation. And I have to say, despite all that you just said, David, I still believe in democracy in the US. I still think we have a chance. I know we do. And frankly, even if we don't, we have to at least do our best to try. And as this particular slide, which I stole from somebody, I don't remember whom, says, this is our democracy. We will fight to preserve it. There's many ways to say this: to protect it, defend it, save it, improve it, whatever you want to call it. I think that's one place we all have to come from, that we have to be bold and confident that in fact, we can do this. Because without that belief and without bringing that hope forward, we're not going to inspire anybody. And I think the people we have to inspire the most, this is my belief, are the people in the middle, the moderates. And we'll get into that in a second. But the moderates I define as moderate Democrats. We know a lot about the moderate Democrats lately with Sinema and with Manchin. The independents, of course, and what I call principled pro-democracy Republicans. Are there any? Maybe a handful, I'm not sure. Maybe in the voting booth when ostensibly nobody can see what they're voting, how they're voting. That might also be a source. Well, I appreciate David's point about talking to the other side, I do want to make sure that we're strategic in the sense that we focus on what we can actually move. We have a very limited time frame here. I mean, I think some of what David said is more long-term, education being one of them. We're not going to get everyone educated in the next, I don't know, 6 months. So much as I would love to have that be the case, it's not the case. With that said, hold on one second. You know, I also want to make sure that we look higher and we think in terms of what perhaps, you know, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said. And he was all about fighting the good fight. And I know fighting, we're not into fighting as Democrats, I don't think. And I think we have to change that thinking a bit. As we'll see in a slide to come, honestly, I was expecting a lot of people in the middle to simply go, oh my God, democracy is in fact in peril, and I will vote differently. That's not happening, at least based on polling, based on the Virginia and New Jersey elections and other elections. It's not happening. So maybe those folks in the middle who are less engaged are simply not awake yet. And that's one of our jobs, is to awaken them, or enough of them to get us over the 50% mark, or whatever the case might be. We have to aim higher than 50%, because we do know there is suppression. We do know there's gerrymandering. We do know there are things that, frankly, we can't control. We have to do the Stacey Abrams dance. We just have to have a massive get out the vote effort that overcomes all of those structural things that keep Democrats down and democracy down. So as Martin Luther King said, don't give up. I think it's the same thing for democracy. We have to commit. And I know that that's difficult when you're retired, frankly. That's not how I saw myself spending my retirement, but here we are. So that's also a thought. So I just wanted to kind of play off what David said in terms of, actually, I think one of these, the one on the left, is one that you already mentioned, David. NPR said 6 in 10 Americans say US democracy is in crisis. So that's interesting. That would imply to me that people will change their behavior in terms of how they vote. So far, as I mentioned, that's not what we're seeing. And interestingly enough, and I don't know the answer on this. There is discussion out there in the Washington Post and others, and you can say that they're credible or not, but for me they are. And I try to use several different sources as well. Messaging focused on democracy and its vulnerability has limited voter appeal. And so far, it has not changed the equation. One of the ideas is that democracy, quote unquote, is too abstract. It's too academic. It doesn't relate to my life as I live it, et cetera, et cetera. So what I want to do now is talking about protecting democracy. And this is kind of the workshop portion. And I really love for everyone to participate as much as you can. And I can't see everybody. So Colleen, maybe you can go. Let me go to, no, that didn't help. I'd like to make this just kind of like the popcorn kind of thing, where just jump in. If we have some overlapping comments, I think that's just fine. Usually we try and keep one person at a time talking, but let's talk about how we talk about democracy. So first of all, do you agree with what I just said? And it's not necessarily my belief, but do you agree that talking about democracy is motivating, or is it not motivating for voters? I'm all about the 2022 midterms. So in that context, is something like protect our democracy a motivating message? And before we jump in, I will say, this is what I expected everybody, not everybody, but most in the middle to do. Say, I'm not a Democrat if I'm an independent, but I'm voting exclusively for Democrats to save our democracy. That is, in a nutshell, my hope for the country. I think that's what has to happen. This is from Max Boot, who was a Republican until I believe, I want to say 2018 or 19. I would call him a never Trumper, pretty famous columnist. So he's made that leap. We have to help folks make that leap. So the question is, and David, I'd love for you to jump in here as well. Is talking about democracy, just democracy, protecting democracy, is that a motivating message, or is it too abstract? Anyone? Alona, you always have ideas.
Well, for me, my concern is that it's being interpreted as one wishes, that the Republicans and the really crazy Trumpies are also claiming that democracy
That's absolutely true.
is gone. And so we have a real serious problem here. We're not agreeing on what democracy is.
Yeah.
And I don't think a textbook definition is going to help. I don't think particularly further education on it is going to help because people aren't patient enough about it. They think they know it. They're very opinionated. And it's, I think this is the crime of all, is that we've lost perspective of what democracy is. And those who have lived under non-democratic policy countries and policies do know that definition, but not the US.
Any solutions you might see? You said, education is not the thing because people already are.
Well, I mean it in the sense of school book education. Where we just don't get to those issues in school anymore. And I think the only thing I can suggest is that if we have a chance to see more in other countries what the loss of democracy has entailed, and it's not just the definition of communism or fascism, it's really an autocracy where we've lost the perspective of having an equal right in our own opinions represented. But again, as I said, that's going to be a very difficult thing because by the time that takes over, we're really at a major loss.
Right. Larry.
Yeah, I'm the GOTV person here at Lakeside, and I'm looking, let's get out the vote. I'm looking for any informations that are perspectives that we can, I hate to use the word fear, but we can frighten people a little bit about what it's like to live not in a democracy. And, you look at the Erdogans of the world and the Bolsonaros in Brazil. I mean, what's it like to live with the,
Orban. Since I'm Hungarian, I have dual citizenship.
Thank you.
No, actually, totally agree. And you're wording it correctly, Larry. And perhaps I know Dee Dee has suggested doing some workshops on democracy itself. We're going to be preaching to the choir, and what Terry's asking is to think of the broader picture. How are we going to help the whole populace change? But you're absolutely right. And those examples are giving people some opportunity to compare what we have and what and what other countries are dealing with.
Yeah, one thing I would say, Terry, I thank you for focusing us on staying positive and not losing faith. And life is always full of surprises. I mean, there's no way on God's green earth that the Continental Army should have defeated the British. There's no, I never thought in my lifetime I would see, Africans able to vote in South Africa. I never thought I would see gay marriage. And so no matter how dark things seem, there is always hope. And it is by hoping and working to achieve that hope that we find reason to have hope. I wonder, I'll just throw this out here, rather than protect our democracy, which of course both the Republicans and the Democrats are now claiming, I wonder if the abortion argument, someone needs to turn off their mic. Some people say it's a woman's right to choose. No, it's murder. Why don't we just focus on what we can both sides agree on, and that is we want to prevent unwanted pregnancies. Similarly, I wonder if we could is there a way to get people to focus on establishing an election system where both sides can trust the results?
I think those are great points. I don't know how to accomplish the latter election system. I don't have the megaphone. I don't think any of us do, although maybe Democrats abroad can make a dent. in the Trump. I mean, he's got an incredible megaphone and he's not afraid to use it. So, all right. Anybody else have any thoughts here? Because I do want to move on because there's another way to approach this. It's less abstract about protecting our democracy. It's about fear. So as Larry just talked about, because I think that's where we are. Any other thoughts before I move to the next slide?
Oh, oh.
All right. Oops. All right. So our personalized democracy message is better than the more abstract protect democracy. And what I mean by that, I'll give you some examples. If we lose our democracy, some things are going to change in our lives. And yes, we've already lost our democracy to some point because we are an oligarchy in many respects. But as David pointed out earlier, we're not in the fascist mode quite yet. We can still travel freely. We still have the ability to, for people living in Mexico who are US citizens, we can still vote from abroad. We have financial security in many cases for those, in their 60s and above, including Social Security and Medicare. So one idea is to say, what if the insurrection worked? Well, that's a Freudian slip. If we lose our democracy, you could lose and then talk about what's at stake. Financial security, these are just some ideas, freedom to vote from abroad, economic opportunities. I sort of threw that one in there. It's kind of an outlier in some ways because if you're retired, that may not be as important. But one thing I think Democrats forget to talk about is economic opportunity. It is so important to so many people. And when we talk about healthcare only, although it's certainly got economic implications, et cetera, I think we really leave sort of money on the table if you want to go off that. So other freedoms, things we can't even hardly conceive of, the freedom to travel. So anybody, thoughts on kind of the fear-based approach? If we lose our democracy, you could lose your fill in the blank.
I wonder, I'm going to keep this short, but there were so many things that horrified me during the Trump administrations, but one of the worst was the knowledge that my country in broad daylight was tearing children away from their parents.
Mm-hmm.
And we still haven't even returned them.
No.
And I don't want to be returned to being the nation that would engage in such a practice again. And I think most people, understand you don't take children away from their parents. And do you want to be in a country where that is our standard practice? That to me is frightening.
Yeah. And I think that hits home for a lot of people who, especially in the middle, they live through they're stressed. They're not thinking about politics like we are. They're just not. They have children. They're part of the sandwich generation where they're taking care of kids and their elderly parents may not be in great health. How do we grab these people? So any other ideas about things to focus on? What about this approach? Those are the two questions.
One thing I thought about was this thing of freedom to travel. I imagine what happened, to Germany, to the East and West, that families were separated that way, David, right? It wasn't just children, it was entire families. You could not get back home. So that would be a fear-based kind of thing to pose to Democrats or voters that are living abroad, that they can't go back to their home country ever. I mean, I was married to an Iranian who could not go back to his country for fear that he'd, not be able to come back to the United States. So that's awful to think about, but I would have a hard time if I could not go back to see my family.
Again, making it very real, very personable, less abstract, more tangible.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing we have to be careful of is we don't overblow it so far that people go, that's never going to happen. Like you said earlier, David, that, American exceptionalism, it can't happen here. But I think we're at a point where we have to start looking at those things and talking about, putting them out there. Other thoughts? Because I think this is probably one of the key slides right here. I don't have a lot of other solutions. So
Well, I don't think you were referring to just expats, were you? I mean, Colleen, I know your question was very good. Your point was very good, but as a global society, which means that we're recognized as individuals outside the U.S. One of the problems we've had is losing our rights because we live outside the U.S. Okay, not just because the country where we are may have less rights. So yes, I think we have to continue to push the idea, excuse me, that losing our voting rights, losing already what's happening in the US as far as abortion is concerned, possible attacks on gay rights, things, all sorts of things like that. Women's rights are very much the message that we're doing is by losing democracy. But how to put that into terms that helps motivate voting, we got to work on that.
I mean, the other issue too is that if we're too negative, it will simply freeze people. It will shut them down. So we got to find that sweet spot, and that's tough. Larry.
Well, we, in the past, did lose some banking rights, and some of it's been fixed, but it would be awful easy to see how it could slide backwards again. Many of you may be aware of it, but that the whole idea of being able to send money overseas has been suspect. A lot of banks in Mexico didn't really want to deal with US citizens because there was so much paperwork now to have to go through. So that's just one example, but it's happened in my lifetime, and it could happen again.
What about focusing on retirement? Because
Social
the
Security, yeah,
Republican Party wants to gut Social Security, and but I'm not worried about just that. I'm worried about a retirement as a teacher that comes from the United States, and I just think everyone, no matter how old or young you are, do you want to be able to retire or not? And current trends are no. I mean, it's even, I saw what was happening to the young teachers coming into my profession, and their retirements are going to be far more truncated than mine is, and they're going to have to pay far more into it than I ever did. And I'm just frightened for the future of, the ability of people to be able to even afford a house. And so maybe tap into the dream. What kind of life do you want to have? Would you like to have health care? Would you like to own your own home? Would you like to be able to retire? Would you like to be able to travel? That's what we're fighting for. Your dream, the life you want to live.
That's a good point.
What was that?
Hello.
Yes.
Well, also, I think a lot of the anger is really fear that people working hard can't make enough money to be able to afford not alone vacations, food. And a lot of that has to do with this kind of lopsided, everything is aimed at the consumer, and the producer is getting a very raw end. Farmers are going out of business all the time, so they can sell meat at a low price. And it's a few huge conglomerates, not so much probably really even the Republicans or the Democrats, but we have these huge wealthy people that end up being like boulders in the road of getting ahead at all. They have so much money they can't spend it, but they want more.
Wow, that was beautifully stated too. Thank you. And I'm sorry, I can't tell who's speaking, so my apologies.
That was Betsy Kelly who was
It was
speaking.
Betsy Kelly. That was my guess. Thank you, Alona.
If I can speak for Emily, she was having some internet issues.
Ah.
She says, I like David's idea, but would expand it to talking about the American dream, including retirement. That would also speak to Hispanic voters whom one study showed migrated to the Republican Party because the GOP was talking about the American dream, whereas the Democrats weren't.
Yep, we've had a lot of conversation about that. That's where I was talking about economic opportunity, also known as the American dream, ability to move up, mobility. That during the last election, we got very focused on kind of some sub issues, as I see it, and we left some people behind, especially Hispanics who are seeing that one reason they move many to the US is to, you know, to do exactly that, to see mobility that they don't see here in Mexico.
Hay ensalada en el refrigerador.
Okay.
Adiós.
Can I
Thank you,
read
Emily, for
another?
saying that.
Can I read a couple others that are in the chat?
Sure, please.
Dab Stedman says, Thomas Frank, what's the matter with Kansas, claims that the Democrats have abandoned the middle and working class and in favor of elitism. The party is peopled with the same graduates of Ivy League schools as the Republicans, and their policies reflect this. Do you agree?
Well, we have to tell people that. There is a lot of misunderstanding.
Misunderstanding about,
What really Democrats stand for, what Republicans stand for. Trump, in his way, was very smart. He touched into this feeling of worthlessness that so many in a low-paying job feel when they can't even adequately take care of their family. But of course, he never did anything for them, but he could read the feelings involved.
I think that's an incredible point.
That's true. I agree.
I think that's an incredible point.
I have something I would like to say, please.
Sure.
My name is Margie, and I'm sitting here in the United States at this point because I couldn't get there to Puerto Vallarta this year, and I am very jealous of all of you who may be there tonight. But basically, I wanted to say that I've been reading Heather and Hubble. I'm trying to read as much as I can, and I have found out so much about this country and our history that I never learned in school. But I also was a school nurse for several years at one point in my career. And I agree that the education in this country for our young people is not what it was in my era. But the other thing that I would like to say is that the Democrats, and I am an independent, I've been an independent my entire life, but I always vote Democrat. But bottom line is they don't do well at messaging. So what you're trying to figure out tonight is very important. What's the message? And we can't always be just real nice because the Republicans aren't. And so one of the things that I wanted to say is a lot of my friends, of course, are on Social Security and Medicare. And if they think that's going to be taken away from them, they're going to vote Democrat versus a Republican. So bottom line is be a little bit more, not harsh, but astute in how you say things to people. Have a message. Because if you listen to the Republicans up here, they have these little snippets that they put out there, and the people understand those snippets and take to them. So that's just what I need to say tonight. And thank you so much for having this program. I'm learning a lot too.
Wow, thank you very much, Marjorie, for joining us. Wow, that was also beautifully said. I just wanted to respond to Deb. I'm sorry, it's Deb Stedman. Yes, or maybe where did it go? somebody commented about the same schools, Ivy League schools, provide both Republicans and Democrats. And that is true. That is absolutely true. Joe Biden notwithstanding. But I will say that from my standpoint, that those Ivy League schools are like tools. Tools can be used for good purposes or bad purposes. A hammer can kill, a hammer can hammer and create a new home. So I still got to say, I get anxious when I hear people talk about, and I think this is kind of where this is going, Republicans and Democrats being all the same. I don't agree with that. I don't think that that's true and that that's going to get us where we need to go. I think that's for some people, not everybody, but for some people, I think that might be a cop out to do nothing. That, they're all the same. I'm going to do nothing. And that's the last place we want people to be. But that's
Well,
my opinion.
this
Other
is
people-
Margie again, and I have heard that stated
Yeah,
by people who haven't voted in years. And when you say to them, what? I'm so surprised. Tell me why not? And they'll say, they're all crooked. They're just all crooked
Right.
and they're just, so what's the point? Well, there's a big point, and I, of course, being the mouth from the South here, I do say to them, excuse me, but here's why you need to be voting, blah, blah, blah. But bottom line is that a lot of people feel that way.
right.
And so I think that's why we have to be more, the big dream is a great thing to say, but we have to be a little bit more into what makes them tick. And in my generation, Social Security, Medicare, and the loss of that, they're going to listen to that because they don't want to lose it. A lot of people in this country, I found out through my years, they live on their Social Security. And so basically it's quite important to them. So
Yeah.
enough, I'm done.
Okay, thank you. That was great. It's 5:05. I'm going to move on to the next slide. This is the last slide, major slide of the presentation. It's kind of a play off on the first we just talked about, the first slide, number 1. So we've got to convince. So first of all, midterms are always challenging because people don't show up as much as they do in presidential elections. I think everyone probably knows that. We've got to move beyond that if we're going to address our democracy crisis. And it's kind of what we were just talking about in terms of people saying, they're all the same, I'm just going to sit this one out. So one of our challenges as Democrats is to make sure that people don't just sit this out. Or if they do, they realize that, I saw one thing that says, Democrats who stay home elect Republicans. That's the idea. But this is a bigger idea. The idea is that it's not just about Democrats and Republicans, it's about democracy. Does that hold any water for anybody? Is that motivating? Is that, how would you change that to make it even more powerful?
Well, one, I wanted to remind everyone that in 2018, there was it's the historically high youth turnout.
Yes.
And Michael Moore even made one of his movies about that. And that certainly was one of the votes that was extremely important for rallying thereafter in 2020. So midterms can have value. And so we need to remind, it says 28% of young people voted in 2018, which was a hell of a deal. And so there is some positiveness in this.
Those are the people we want to reach.
Get everybody out to vote.
Right. How do we convince people in the Biden era that we're safe? It's all now everything's back to good, back to normal, back to where it should be, because it's not.
How about, because I think I heard you say, Terry, and it always dismays me when I hear that most people can't handle abstract terms like democracy.
I know.
Oh my God. But anyways, how about this? Just the simple question, do you want your vote to count? I mean, that really is what separates
Yeah.
current Democrats from Republicans. Republicans are doing everything in their power to
Right.
ensure that our votes don't count. And Democrats are doing everything in their power to ensure that they do. And that's a positive statement. Do you want your vote to count or not? And if you do, then vote like that matters to you.
Vote
because-
like your life depends on it, right? That was one of the Biden-Harris
Yeah, I mean,
mantras.
because
Could I
everyone,
make a comment on that? I think that have your vote count is very important, but this idea of I can do what I want has limits to it. And I get the feeling that a number of people don't think that their neighbor is important, and there's something we owe to each other in a democracy. We can't just do anything we want, like we can't drive our car in the wrong lane because they like it better or something. We have to go by some agreed upon rules.
Well, I think that was the shared values that David was talking about earlier. That actually kind of covers several of his points, but
Emily would like to suggest saying, do you want to be able to vote?
Mhm.
well, the only thing is that the Republicans, I mean, they are trying to deny that in ensuring that anyone convicted of a felony can't vote, and then they pass racist laws that ensure that African Americans can't vote. But I'm just wondering, I just think, I don't think the Republicans, if they gain power, are going to say, all right, no one can vote anymore. They're just going to rig the system so that you know, vote
they're
all
gonna
you
play
want.
games.
You can vote all you want, but you know, you're still going to win. Your vote's not going to count.
Larry's trying to vote, to talk, but,
I am going to vote though.
oh, good.
And one thing I forget who mentioned it, but the situation with young people, I'm old enough, although I appreciate the environment immensely, but I think that's got to be a prime motivator for young people to realize that if we start failing in the next couple elections, there will be no Paris Accord that the United States is involved in. And we'll go right back to the oil companies and running the whole show. And there'll be no chance of us saving the future of this planet. So I think personally, I think this is one of the largest potential disasters we have looking, going forward if we don't get the young people out to vote, because it's going to be their life.
This is Margie again. And I have done a lot of volunteering around the world. And what I'm finding is that young people are really interested in climate change, and they're keeping track of what's happening. And I think that that's a huge thing that we should put out there for them to vote on. In some way, get a message to them that without voting and voting Democrat, that the climate change will not be addressed because Republicans don't believe in it. So I agree with that gentleman. Thank you.
Just as a caveat here, I did look up more about the 2018 youth vote, which was apparently basically gun control over the Parkland, Florida, the shootings that were going on that year. We're not even talking about gun control anymore. Everybody has bought more guns since they had to protect themselves at home and they had to protect themselves against the so-called, terrorists out there. But obviously that triggered a turnout. Plus, climate change is absolutely growing among the youth. And maybe we can go back to that gun control again. I mean, we have only had more and more tragedies.
Yes.
If they will listen to that, in other words, that they take personally, school, where they're dealing with wearing bulletproof vests to school. I mean, maybe that will help, but that's just the youth group. They also need to take responsibility for the future, which is the climate control angle.
All right, so just a quick time check. Hey, Dee Dee.
Can I just say one thing real quick? 1.8 million high school kids have turned 18 this year and will be eligible to vote. That's almost 2 million people.
Right.
And if we say what we're saying, they're the ones who are looking at climate change and looking at democracy, and they're the ones we should really be grabbing.
I gotta say, I love you guys all because you know what? Our mandate is to focus on our area here in in Mexico. But you know what? Easier said than done because it's not the world we live in. We're all interconnected. So it's really hard for me to do. And thank you all for being there with me. Because I think we can't approach this from just Mexico, even though that's our official mandate.
If we want to focus here, I wonder what kind of future do you want for your children and grandchildren?
Mhm,
Right.
Exactly, right.
And because there's not a person here who doesn't say, no, wait a minute, you're talking about my kids there. And you say, well, do you want them to have a vote that counts? Do you want them to have, how about what kind of environment? And just maybe, the Democrats are the party of the future of our children and grandchildren. That would get people out to vote, I think.
Just a thought, but look at what's happened with the governor of Virginia, who's destroyed everything in a week's time.
Yeah.
I think we have to also point to examples like that, that's what can happen in a special election. It's also going to happen in the midterms if we're not careful. Everything that was unraveled under Trump, that has been put back together again, is now going to get unraveled again. It's very, very precarious, our so-called democracy. The fact that it can be changed that quickly from one head of state to another, head of a U.S. state, or head of a district, or head of a on a federal level, head of a country. So with that, we have to pull out every string we can, just do exactly what
Exactly. That's really the
they're
bottom line.
doing.
Pull out every stop we can. Make
This
it
is
happen.
Eric. This is
Hey,
Eric. I think David had a very good point. There are a lot of people down here who I run into who basically say they're so upset and aggravated by the news, they don't even listen to it anymore. They're not following what's happening. And I think that the idea of maybe emphasizing kids, grandkids, is maybe the most powerful thing to pull at people's heartstrings, and to make that a number one reason to vote. Have a healthy country for them to grow up in.
I agree. I think that's one of the best suggestions if you're looking at Mexican people that are expats.
Dual
Yeah.
nationals as well, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so my God, we're past time by quite a bit, but I mean, this is important. So thank you all for staying. Anybody who wants to drop off, feel free to do that. But I do need to wrap this up pretty quickly. I just want to hear from anybody who hasn't spoken so far. Anybody else who has?
Terry, could you take the slide down so we can see everybody?
I think so. It's a great point.
If I could make just one last statement, it's Betsy Kelly again. I really wish we go back to civics classes in school and also logic. There are states that forbid the teaching of logic because it goes against somebody's religion. But Texas, for one, at one point anyway, had that. But those two things prepare you so much. You know who does what in the government or should do what in the government. And logic helps you get out of those fantasies of all the bad Democrats are into child pornography or whatever the crap is that they're trying to sell at the moment. Excuse me.
I'll comment. I'm Tom McClure. Enjoyed it. Thank you, David. Before we close, I'd really appreciate your putting your email address up there again, or giving it to us again. I didn't completely get a note. I think one approach that that I think is important is not to lose touch with our base. Let's say if we're we're in a particular part of the US. I happen to be from Kentucky. Everybody's heard of that. And I made a point of going back, working, and contributing to the candidates opposing the people that we have entrenched in government. I don't even need to mention their names. But,
Please don't.
but I found that it was educational for me, and also I think it was beneficial. We find a lot of the retired people in our diminishing numbers in Kentucky, at least in rural Kentucky, very committed to work on behalf of candidates opposing some of the power elements. Mitch McConnell and who's the doctor? I keep forgotten his name. The one against Fauci.
Right.
Yeah. So and I found that a lot of the campaigns were very, very young people. You know, college kids and
Mhm.
surprising numbers of younger people. Very disappointing when the candidates lost. But still, there's there's a move, at least in Kentucky, through Citizens for the Commonwealth, to basically work on the grassroots, and that's an educational task. That's getting out and educating as much as possible in the community through meetings. Now, the COVID situation has affected that greatly, needless to say, but I find it energizing and I hope beneficial to our cause. And I'm not saying it's a Democrat cause. I'm saying the democracy cause. To stay involved, stay connected, and work on supporting those people that are at the grassroots in those various swing states. You know, not that Kentucky's a swing state, but that's my 2 cents on this. It is frightening. There's no question frightening. Thank God there is some change. When I make it a point to go back periodically, we now have, at least in the gym, we have not only Fox News, but they actually have CNN. They've not reached over to MSNBC, but having CNN on some of the waiting room TVs and so on is a change. There's some creeping alternatives in there. So that's my 2 cents. I think I need to stay involved. I will stay involved, working directly, supporting directly, and trying to keep those that are in the trenches energized and dedicated. That's my 2 cents. Thanks for letting me share.
Thank you, Tom. Really appreciate it. All right. I'm going to call it as complete for today. So again, thank you for attending today's event. I think this was great, I have to say. I think there was a lot of good interaction, and I'm really appreciative. So as we always want to talk about, just to wrap this up, probably one of the best ways to protect democracy is to vote, and to vote for Mexico if you live in Mexico. And to do that, votefromabroad.org is our nonpartisan arm that registers anybody that's a US citizen to do exactly that. And the important thing is to do it now, because many states are starting their primaries. Texas, for example, has their primary first on March 1st. And then there's several to follow in May. So it's time to get vote ready now. And the best way to do that is to go to votefromabroad.org. It walks you through the federal form, which is kind of wonky, that you need to fill out to vote with an overseas ballot. And Colleen has put the links in the chat box. You can just copy those, paste those into a notes document or whatever you want to do, Word document, and that should help you do exactly that. And of course, we always want you to join Democrats Abroad. Tell other folks. There is the way too long web browser address, URL, whatever you want to call it. But that's also in the chat box. So you don't have to write that down. You can just copy it and paste it. And then last but not least, and this I'm kind of speaking for Larry here, and he's what we call the GOTV, or Get Out the Vote chair, the leader for our local chapter. But if there's anybody, and I know not everybody here is from our local chapter. We really appreciate that you've joined us. just email us at this address. And again, this is in the chat box, info.mx.lakechapala@democratsabroad.org. And we will get it to the right place. And we could really use support. It can be something as small as, Tom and I were talking about this today, Tom Payne, who's on the call, about ushering at some of our voter assistance events on the ground at LCS, our Lake Chapala Society. There's lots of things that need to be done. We need help. We need your help. We need committed folks' help like you who are on this call today. So I think that's it. Anybody else have any last parting thoughts?
Mhm.
Was this helpful?
All right.
My only thought is if there's anybody that has computer skills and would like to help us help to register and request ballots, which is part of that votefromabroad.org site. We need some specialists that are comfortable on their computer, that we're going through a training course we're gonna hold in early February. So if there's a couple, 3 of you out there that feel comfortable on the computer and want to put some great effort into help other Americans who probably aren't as computer literate, help them get their ballots here and be able to vote, please contact me. I'd really love to get you set up on it. We can use your help a lot. So.
Thank you, Larry. Okay, well, this has been incredible. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting. And just one quick plug. So we do a speaker event like this, or not like this, similar to this, the third Monday of every month. I believe it's the 21st of February. And we will have, forgot to put this on here. Yeah, the 21st of February, President's Day. We will have an incredible speaker. Her name is Afton Ben, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. She's spoken before. She does rural organizing in the Appalachia area, Tennessee, et cetera. And she is incredible, talking about building bridges. So I encourage you all to watch for our next event, and we'll see you here.
Thanks,
Thank you
Jerry.
again, David, for your incredible insights. Really, really appreciate it.
Thanks, David.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you again for attending.
Thanks a lot, David.
Okay, thanks, Dave.
Thanks for joining us, Emily, even though I think you had computer problems, if you can hear me. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end it. Thank you, Colleen. Oh, I missed her.